She had 60 gold coins of debt, and 11 left to her name. And she was about to jump into a freezing river for a stranger. The man was going under. Slowly. Then not slowly. His arms still hooked over a broken timber, each rotation pulling his face lower. The current didn't care. Neither did the dozen people standing on the bank. Watching. Just watching. She pulled off her coat. A hand caught her arm from behind. Hard. That current will take you both. She looked at the hand. Then at the man in the water. Then she removed the hand, finger by finger, and stepped in. 40 seconds of cold. That wasn't cold, it was a decision the river made about her body, total and immediate. She reached him, dragged him out, pressed his chest until the river came out of him. He coughed, breathed, opened his eyes, found her face. She looked back at him, this stranger, this nobody. Then she looked at his coat pocket. The royal seal of Ash Vale. And everything she thought she was doing suddenly meant something completely different. The river did not care about her debt. That was the thing about the Asheron. It moved the same way regardless of what was happening on its banks. Regardless of the number written in Soren's head every morning when she opened her eyes. Regardless of the fact that 60 gold coins and 21 days were the only two quantities that mattered in her life right now. The river just moved. And Soren moved with it. She was on her knees at the shallows, before sunrise, her fingers working the wire trap, with the automatic efficiency of someone who had done this particular task so many times it no longer required conscious thought. Cold water. Cold hands. The same stretch of bank she had worked every morning for 2 years. Since Dale died. Since the world contracted down to this, wire traps, thatch roof, one sick child, and a number that kept growing faster than she could subtract from it. 60 gold coins. 21 days. The math was not complicated. What was complicated was the gap between those two facts. She pulled the trap free. 2 fish. Small ones? She noted this the way she noted most things she could not change, accurately, briefly, and then not again. Behind her, through the single south-facing window of the cabin, Kit was still asleep. She knew this without looking. She knew the quality of the silence that came from the cabin when Kit was sleeping versus when he was awake and trying to pretend he was sleeping. She knew the sound of his breathing at 30 yards on a still morning. The slight catch. The almost whistle between inhales. Not worse than yesterday. Which was the only direction she tracked. She set the fish in the bucket. Reached for the second trap. That was when she heard it. The sound came from the north. Sharp. Clean. 2 points. Nearly simultaneous. Soren stopped moving. She knew sounds. She had grown up along this river. She had listened to weather take structures apart, over years and seasons. She knew what timber sounded like, when rot finally won. She knew what stone did under pressure, the long, low complaint of weight redistributing, gradual and inevitable. This was not that. This was the sound of something decided in advance. She dropped the trap. The path to Asheron Bridge was a quarter-mile north along the bank. She ran it. The frost had glazed the low places into something closer to glass than ground. She took it anyway, not fast enough for recklessness, not slow enough for caution. Which was a pace she had learned to move through most of her life. The bridge came into view around the bend, where the cottonwoods thinned. Or what had been the bridge? The central span had gone into the river at an angle. One end still attached to the stone abutment by a single cable singing under tension. The other end fighting the current. Timber everywhere. Brown-white water churning, where the structure had disturbed it. People on the west bank. A dozen of them. Mill workers. A woman with a cart. 3 men on horseback, who had ridden up fast, from the direction of the village, their horses still breathing hard. They stood. They looked. They said things to each other in the tight, useless way of people confronting something that had already happened. Nobody was in the water. Soren scanned the surface. Systematic? Near bank to far bank. Upstream edge to downstream drift. Debris. More debris. A section of planking still hinged to itself, spinning. And there, 20 feet out, the deep channel, where the current ran strongest. A man. Not swimming. One arm hooked over a broken timber that was itself rotating. Slowly. Each rotation pushing his face lower. His coat, heavy wool, the dark brown of something made for weather rather than appearance, was saturated, adding weight with every second. His face was above the surface. Barely. The line between barely and not was narrowing. One of the horsemen was talking about rope. Another was talking about riding for a physician. The mill workers looked at each other, with the particular expression of men hoping someone else would move first. Soren pulled off her outer coat. Set it on the frozen ground. A hand caught her arm from behind. One of the horsemen. Leaning from the saddle, his grip firm. That current will take you both. She looked at the hand on her arm. Then at the man in the water. The timber had rotated again. His face dipped below the surface. 1 full second. His arm, by reflex, by some body memory, that was running, without his mind, pulled him back up. She removed the hand from her arm. Stepped into the river. The cold was not a temperature. It was a decision the water made about her body. Immediate. Total. Every muscle contracting at once. Breath gone before she had taken a single stroke. She went under from the initial impact. Came up gasping. Forced her arms into motion through water that resisted like something thicker than water. The current she had read from the bank. She angled upstream, so it would carry her toward him rather than past. Her hands lost sensation in the first 30 seconds. She noted this the way she noted most things that could not be changed. Accurately. Briefly. And then not again. She reached him in under a minute. Up close, he was larger than he had appeared, from the bank. Broad across the shoulders. Dark-haired. Somewhere around 40 years of age. His face, even slack and gray, as it was, had the structure of a man accustomed to making decisions in it. Lines from weather. Lines from something harder than weather. Right now it was making no decisions at all. The arm that had been hooked over the timber had released. He was sinking. She got her right arm across his chest. The way Dale had shown her, that warm afternoon on the river near his family's farm, the summer before they married, in a motion that had nothing in common with this one except the mechanics. She angled for the bank. He was entirely dead weight. She was swimming the effort of 2 people, through a current designed for neither. Her feet found the bottom, before she expected it. The shallows came fast on this curve. She staggered. Held. Dragged him the last few yards through water that dropped, from chest deep to knee deep to ankle deep. Then hands reached them. The mill workers, finally committing, pulled them both up, onto the gravel. She went to her knees. Stayed there for exactly 1 breath. Then she turned to him. Not breathing. She knew what that looked like. She had learned what it felt like to put her ear against the chest, and find it empty of anything useful. She pressed her palms against his sternum and pushed. Once. Twice. 3 times. Water came out of him. River dark. She tilted his head. Breathed into him. Returned to his chest. One of the horsemen was saying something. She did not hear it. She was counting. The cold worked at her hands. She worked through the cold. Underneath her palms, a change. A contraction. The body reconsidering. He coughed. Violent. Full body. The cough of a man expelling a river, from his chest. He rolled onto his side. His shoulders shook with it. She put her hand between his shoulder blades, and kept it there, the same placement she used for Kit on the worst nights. When the cough took hold, and didn't let go, The sound from the people on the bank was the sound of an outcome reversing. Soren barely registered it. She was watching his color. The terrible gray was retreating. Something more alive replacing it. His breathing, ragged, fast, was the most useful sound she had heard in recent memory. His eyes opened. Not fully. Just enough to find her face. The look of a man not yet certain what he was looking at, or whether any of it was real. Then his eyes closed again. "Keep him still," she said. To no one specifically. "Don't move him yet." She sat back on her heels. Her hands were shaking. The cold had moved past discomfort, into the stage, that was simply a condition. Like the hard gravel under her knees. Like the pale sky overhead. She looked at the man. At the people. At the wreck of the bridge still settling in the current. Then she looked at the far bank. A rider. On a black horse. The east ridge, where the north road came down, through the pines. He had not shouted. Had not ridden downstream to find the ford, and crossed to help. He sat with the stillness of a man at a distance he had chosen. Watching an outcome he had come to confirm. She counted 2 seconds. He turned his horse, and rode back up the north road the way he had come. She looked away from where he had been. Stored it. Set it beside the other things she had stored today. Which was the quality of the sound, when the bridge broke. The way the cable had gone fast, and clean on both sides, nearly simultaneously. Not the way weather and time took a structure. The way a person took it. Working in the dark. With tools and intention. She looked back at the man on the gravel. He was someone the geometry was about. That much was already clear. The cabin was a quarter-mile south. The mill workers, young enough to still be at the stage, where a clear direction, from a woman in a crisis felt like permission rather than a challenge, helped carry him. Between the three of them, Soren at his right side, they got him upright and moving. His feet found purchase slowly. Then more certainly. Muscle memory asserting itself below the level of consciousness. She talked to him on the path. Low and even. Not for comfort. For function. Quarter mile. Level ground. You don't need to do anything except stay upright. The worst part is already behind you. She had said those words before. In a different season. To a different man. They hadn't been entirely true then either. But they had been true enough to be useful. Which was all words had ever needed to be. Kit was at the table, when she kicked the door open. Bent over a drawing, the charcoal moving in the slow, committed way that meant he was working on something that mattered to him. He looked up. Looked at the man between the workers. Looked at his sister, dripping river water on the floorboards, clearly not planning to explain herself immediately. He set down the charcoal. "Get the blanket from my bed," Soren said. He got it. Without a word. Moving with the quiet efficiency of a child, who had learned, at an age when children should not have had to learn it, that certain moments required action before questions. They put the man on her bed. The mill workers stood, with the uncertain look of people who had done their part and weren't sure if more was required. Soren thanked them. She meant it. They left. She stood in the center of her cabin and took a full breath. The first real one, since she had gone into the water. Then she looked at the man on her bed and began working the problem. The coat came off first. Then the shirt beneath it. Then the boots. Kit helped without being asked. She went to the trunk at the foot of the bed. Inside were Dale's spare clothes. Folded. She had folded them 18 months ago, when she'd finally been able to put them away, without being able to put them away entirely. Flannel shirt. Heavy wool trousers. Between the blanket and the dry clothes she got him into something that was not actively pulling heat from his body. The fever was starting. She could feel it in his forehead. Not the burning of deep infection. The beginning of the body's argument with what had happened to it. She put water on the stove. Found the medicine tin. started willow bark tea. Not because she was confident it would be sufficient, but because it was what she had. And doing something with what you had was always preferable to standing still knowing what you lacked. His face, now clear of river mud, was interesting in the way that faces were interesting when they had been lived in seriously. Weather lines? Decision lines. The hands resting on the blanket were large, and marked by years of outdoor work. Not the clean scars of accidents. The accumulated record of someone who had spent a long time doing difficult things in difficult conditions. His fingernails were clean. She noted that the way she noted small things that didn't fit the obvious reading of a person. Kit appeared at her elbow. Is he going to die? Not if I can manage it. Can you manage it? She looked at her brother. He was asking a factual question, and deserved a factual answer. I think so. He nodded once. Accepting this, went back to his chair. Picked up his charcoal. Returned to his drawing, with the focus of a child who had learned that the best thing he could do when his sister was working was not become an additional problem. Soren changed behind the curtain. Wrung the river water from her outer coat and hung it near the stove. Sat in the chair beside the bed. She was still working through what she had seen at the bridge. Not the collapse itself, that was a finished fact, not available for revision. What she was working through was the geometry of it. The sound. 2 clean points nearly simultaneous. Not one failing first, and the load transferring before the second gave way. That was how time and weather took a structure. The former was how a person took it. Working in the dark with tools and intention. And the rider on the east bank. Watching. Leaving once he had seen what he came to see. She set the geometry aside and looked at the man on her bed. He was someone the geometry was about. But what she did not yet know, what she needed to know, before she did anything else, was who he was. And whether the people responsible for the bridge already knew he had survived it. The second question made the first one urgent. He stirred around sunset. Not much. A shift of weight. A small sound that was not unconscious. She was out of the chair before she decided to move. His eyes were open. Not fully. The particular unfocused quality of a person working through layers of disorientation. They moved across the ceiling. The walls. The rope line above the bed, where Kit had hung 3 of his drawings to dry. None of it produced recognition. Then they found her face. And stayed there. You're in a cabin, she said. Her voice level. Her tone the same one she used to give Kit information he needed, without adding the weight of her own feelings about it. South of the Asheron crossing. The bridge came down, and you went into the water. He processed this. She could see it happening, not quickly. With visible effort. How long? Since this morning? It's late afternoon. A silence. His hands moved on the blanket. Testing the texture. The temperature. The solid fact of the surface beneath them. There was someone with me. He stopped. Started again. Before. On the road. A guide. He reached inward. Something not finding its door. The frustration that crossed his face was brief, and immediately managed. The reflex of a man who had practiced controlling what his face said. I know the word. I can't find the name. That's common after the kind of blow you took, she said. It comes back. He looked at her for a moment. The look of a man assessing whether he was being told what was true, or what was convenient. She held the look without adjusting it. He appeared to conclude something. You went in after me. Yes. Why? She had thought about the honest version of this. Because you were going under. And I was the only one close enough. Something moved across his face. Too layered and simultaneous to name easily. Then he closed his eyes. Not from weakness. The deliberate closing of a man who had received information that required sitting with before it could be used. Soren looked at Kit, who was watching from his chair, with the careful attention of a child observing something he understood to be significant. She shook her head slightly. He went back to his drawing. She changed the cloth on his forehead, made note of his breathing, did the things that could be done, and set aside the things that couldn't. The knock came 2 hours later. 3 raps. Sharp. Even. Soren stepped outside, and pulled the door behind her. Hesta Vorn was 52 years old, and built for durability. Iron gray hair pinned under her bonnet, with architectural precision. Dark dress as squared away at evening, as it had been at dawn. She ran the general store on the main road. She ran, in the practical sense that mattered, a considerable portion of what happened in Veldmur, and the land around it. She had lent Soren 60 gold coins in March. For Kit's medicine. For the overdue land note. For the gap between what the winter had cost, and what Soren had been able to earn in it. At terms Hesta called reasonable. That Soren had calculated later to be something else entirely. Compounded monthly. Collateral was the 4 acres the cabin stood on. Hesta looked at Soren's hair, still damp at the roots. At her face, which was the face of someone who had done something physical in the recent past, and was not inviting questions about it. At the closed door of the cabin. You pulled someone from the river. Not a question. Not really. A man went into the water when the bridge came down, Soren said. He needed somewhere warm. Hesta's eyes moved to the closed door. Back to Soren. The note falls due to the land office in 3 weeks. I need to see movement before then. I told you in September I needed more time. And I told you in September that more time had a limit. Hesta opened the small bag at her wrist to produce a copy of the loan agreement, not to hand over. Just to hold. The way people held documents they understood the weight of. Lord Vorn has expressed interest in the river frontage on this side of the county. If the note goes unpaid, I have obligations of my own. Soren looked at Hesta Vorn holding the loan document, and said, clearly and without heat. 3 weeks. I'll have the first payment to you in 3 weeks. On what basis? On the basis that I'm telling you I will. Hesta studied her for a long moment. The look of a woman running arithmetic on variables that didn't resolve cleanly. Then she put the document back in her bag. 3 weeks, Hesta said. That's what the note allows. She turned and walked back up the path. At the top of the rise she paused, barely. The pause of a woman who never stumbled. Looked back once at the cabin. Then she was gone. Soren stood on the path, until the sound of her footsteps on the frozen ground faded entirely. Then she went back inside. Kit was still drawing. He didn't look up. How much trouble? Manageable, Soren said. Is that true? She sat in the chair beside the bed. Picked up the mending she had abandoned, that morning, the tear along Kit's winter coat collar. Her hands needed something to do, while her mind worked the new shape of things. It will be. He accepted this. Went back to his work. The fire held. The light through the south window dropped, from afternoon toward the particular gray of an October evening in this part of the country. She was still mending, when the man on the bed moved again. His eyes were clearer this time. She was out of the chair, before she decided to move. Do you know your name? She asked. The effort. Then nothing. The expression of a man reaching for something in a familiar place, and finding it empty. It's all right, she said. Your coat is hanging near the stove. When you're strong enough to sit up, we can look through your things. Sometimes that helps. He nodded. Slightly. His eyes moved to the rope line above the bed. Kit's drawings hanging there. 3 horses in various states of compositional ambition. Someone lives here, he said. My brother. He's 9. She glanced toward Kit, who had registered he was being discussed, and was deciding whether to acknowledge it. His name is Kit. Kit looked up from his drawing. Considered the man in the bed, with the direct, unself-conscious assessment of a child who had not yet learned to perform disinterest. You're awake, he observed. The man looked at him. Something in his face changed. Not softening exactly, but opening slightly. The way a door opened when the pressure on the other side eased. Apparently. Your horse got out, Kit said. Someone found it downstream. It's alive. The man's jaw tightened slightly at this. A horse meant a name. A name meant someone looking. Which direction did they take it? North, Soren said. Toward the village. Someone will put it up at the livery. He was quiet for a moment. Then, with the caution of someone testing whether the path held weight. Someone will be looking for me. Yes, Soren said. I expect so. She held his gaze. Which is why I need to ask you something, before anyone else comes asking me. He waited. The bridge didn't fail on its own. Her voice level. Precise. The voice she used when she wanted to be heard accurately, and not interpreted. The sound it made, when it broke, I was close enough to hear it. Both sides going nearly at once. That's not how time and weather take a structure. A beat. And there was a man on the east bank who watched you go into the water and rode away, without raising a sound. The silence that followed was the particular silence of a man being seen clearly, possibly for the first time in a while, by someone he had not expected to be capable of it. The man on the bank, he said. Describe him. Black horse. Stillness of a man, who was there specifically to watch, not to help. He left when he had seen what he came to see. Something moved through his expression. Not surprise. The arrival of a confirmation he had been holding at arm's length. Colm, he said. You know him. He is the captain of Lord Vorn's guard. He said it the way a man said the name of a road he remembered being difficult. He works for Breck Vorn. Soren absorbed this. Breck Vorn, she said. The Lord of Greyfen. He has been trying to acquire the river frontage on this side of the valley. She looked at the door. Through Hesta Vorn, who holds my land note. She was here this evening. 20 minutes after the bridge came down. Which was 3 miles from the village. She looked back at him. That is too fast for ordinary news to travel. He looked at her for a long time. The measuring quality she had noticed before was still there. But it was doing something different now. Not assessing threat. Not calibrating reliability. Something more fundamental. The particular attention of a person who has encountered something that doesn't fit the map they have been using. I'll tell you my name when I remember it, he said finally. If you'll keep this between these walls until I do. That was already my intention, Soren said. She did not sleep. She tried. For the 20 minutes between midnight and the moment she stopped pretending. In those 20 minutes she learned nothing useful about sleep, and several things about how her own mind organized problems. When she stopped directing it, it organized them in order of reversibility. The most irreversible first. The bridge was cut. The man was alive. Colm had seen her pull him out. These were facts that could not be undone. Working backward from them, Colm would report to Breck Vorn. Vorn would send someone to find out whether the survivor had been identified, and where he was. The most obvious place to look was the cabin of the woman who had pulled him from the water. That gave her, she estimated, based on how far Colm had to ride, how fast Vorn moved, how long the night provided, until mid-morning. Mid-morning was not nothing. Mid-morning was enough time to do several things, if she did not waste the hours between. Around midnight she heard the man in the bed shift. You're awake, she said without turning from the table. A pause. How did you know? Your breathing changed. She turned. He was sitting up. Not without effort, the lines of it were visible in his face, but upright. Which was more than he had managed earlier. She brought the lantern to the bedside. Do you want the coat? Yes. She brought it, from the hook near the stove. He took it, and went through the pockets himself. methodical. The automatic efficiency of a man who had done this specific inventory many times and knew exactly what should be where. What came out? A folding knife, with a bone handle worn smooth from use. A brass compass. A length of cord. A small leather notebook, pages swollen from water, but readable in sections. And a letter, a single page folded twice. The paper had survived better than the notebook. Because it had been inside the notebook, which had been inside the inner breast pocket, where his own body heat had kept the worst of the water out. He unfolded it. Read it. Read it again. His face during this was the face he kept, composed, not giving information freely. But on the second reading, his jaw set in a way she hadn't seen yet. He held the letter toward her. She brought it closer to the lantern. The handwriting was careful. Deliberate. In the way of someone who had not wanted their natural style recognized. Each letter slightly more vertical than comfortable. Spacing wider than conversational. The message was brief. My lord, the road home carries more risk than your business in the South warrants. The men who stand to gain from your absence are not the kind who wait. This comes with no expectation except that you use it carefully. From someone who has reason to prefer you alive. She turned it over. Blank. She brought it closer to the lantern and looked at the bottom of the front page, where the paper had a slight variation in texture. The ghost of a seal pressed into the page. Not applied with wax pressed. Circular. She angled it toward the flame. A bird. Stylized. Formal. The kind of image used by institutions that wanted to convey permanence. Around it, letters worn faint by the water exposure. The bottom arc was clearer than the top. Vorn Financial House, Veldmur. She held the paper still. Thought about what she was looking at. The letter warning the man away from the Ashran crossing had been written on stationery belonging to Breck Vorn's own financial house. Which meant one of two things. Either Vorn had written it himself, as misdirection, which made no sense given that the bridge had been cut. Or someone inside Vorn's organization had written it. Someone with access to the stationery. Someone who had known what was coming, and had tried to stop it the only way available to them. Anonymously. In advance. Someone warned you, she said. Before I left. His voice was flat. Containing itself. It came to the inn, where I was staying. I thought I was reading significance into a common institution's paper. A pause. The eagle seal is a common design. But you kept it. I kept it. He looked at the letter in his hands. I got on the bridge anyway. Because going around the ford added 8 miles in the cold. And I had a meeting in the village the following morning. He said it without any bid for sympathy. Just locating the decision accurately. The way you located a wrong turn on a map precisely, so you did not take it again. My miscalculation. Soren looked at him. At the letter in his hands. At this man, whose name she still did not know, sitting in the bed she normally slept in the shirt that had belonged to her dead husband, apparently having survived an assassination, because the person who had arranged it had not accounted for the stubbornness of a woman doing her morning fishing. There is someone inside Vorn's organization who tried to stop this, she said. Yes. A beat. They used what they had. The stationery was a signature, meant to be found only by someone who looked. He was watching her. The measuring quality was still there. But it had acquired a different texture now. Less like assessment. More like attention. You reasoned all of that from a faint impression in wet paper. I had a long afternoon. Something shifted in his face. She would think about that shift later. The specific quality of it. The way it was less a change of expression than a change of register. Like a man who had been operating at a certain level of engagement, and encountered something that required him to move to another. My name, he said. And stopped. His eyes went to the middle distance. That internal reach she had watched him make before. This time something different happened. It didn't come back empty. Kedron, he said slowly. The way you said a word in a language you hadn't spoken in a while, testing whether it held. Ash Vale. Kedron Ash Vale. She kept her face exactly as it had been. Because she knew that name. Everyone in this part of the kingdom knew that name. Kedron Ash Vale. The Alpha King of the Northern Territories. The man who had built his lordship, from a single trading license, into something that controlled the passes, through the Grey Spine, and employed hundreds across 3 regions. Whose name appeared in the merchant dispatches, with the regularity of someone, whose actions regularly constituted news. The man Breck Vorn needed gone to take the northern trade routes. The man she had dragged out of the river this morning, because she had been close enough, and no one else was moving. He was watching her face do whatever it was doing. Yes, he said quietly. Most people have a reaction. I'm having one, Soren said. I'm keeping it to myself. He looked at her for a beat. Then something happened in his face that was more than the almost expressions she had catalogued through the day. Not a smile. What came before a smile decides to commit. Fair enough, he said. She picked up the mending she had set aside when he woke. The tear in Kit's coat collar. Her hands needed something to do, while her mind worked the new shape of things. The new shape of things was significant. A man the most powerful lord in the region wanted dead was sitting at her bedside. In her dead husband's shirt. Drinking her willow bark tea. And somewhere between what she had seen at the bridge, and what she held now in her hands, the 60 gold coins, and the 21 days had folded themselves into something larger and more complicated than a debt. She was in it now. Whatever it was. She had been in it since the moment she took off her coat on the riverbank. Some choices changed everything. You rarely knew which ones they were until you were already on the other side of them. The fire held. The wind moved against the cabin walls. Outside, the Ashran ran the way it always ran, indifferent, patient, carrying everything downstream whether it wanted to go or not. Soren mended. Kedron breathed. And Kit slept in his corner, drawing horses in his sleep, one hand still faintly dark, with charcoal at the fingertips. Tomorrow would bring what it brought. She would be ready for it. She was always ready. That was the thing about having nothing. You learned very quickly that what you had was yourself. And you either decided that was enough, or you spent your whole life finding out what happened when you decided it wasn't. Soren had decided a long time ago. The Widow and the River King Part 2, the game played in darkness. She did not sleep that night either. She had stopped expecting to. The cabin was quiet in the way cabins were quiet in the deep hours of October, not peaceful, not still, but compressed. Like the air itself was holding something in. Kit breathing in his corner. The fire settling. The Ashran moving outside, with the patient indifference it had always moved with, regardless of what was happening on its banks. Soren sat at the table. Lantern low. The almanac open in front of her. And in the margins, the narrow white spaces between harvest tables and weather predictions, she was writing the only thing she had enough of to spend freely right now. Order. Not a plan. Not yet. Plans required resources she had not yet confirmed. What she was writing was sequence. What needed to happen? What needed to happen before that? What each step required, from the step before it. She worked it twice. Both times it came out the same, which meant it was probably right. Kedron slept. Not well, she could tell by the intervals, the small adjustments of a man, whose body was still in argument with what had happened to it. But he slept. Which was what his body needed most right now. More than information. More than strategy. More than anything she could give him. Rest was the one resource she could not manufacture. So she let him have it. And she worked. The geometry kept coming back to her. The bridge. Both cables. The sound. The rider on the east bank watching, with the stillness of a man who had been sent to confirm an outcome, not prevent one. Colm. Breck Vorn's captain. Who had known exactly where to be and exactly how long to stay. Which meant Vorn had known Kedren's route. His timing. His plan to cross the Ashern Bridge on a Monday morning in October, alone, without guard. That was specific knowledge. The kind that did not come from guessing. The kind that came from someone who had been close enough to hear it. Someone inside Kedren's own organization. Or someone Kedren had trusted with his itinerary. She wrote that in the margin too. A small mark. A question she did not yet have the information to answer. She left space beside it. By the time the window began to lighten, that particular gray-blue of a dawn, that had not yet committed to being a day, she had a list. Names. Sequence. Questions in order of urgency. At the top of the list, underlined twice, Fennec. The thief rested at the top of her certainty like a stone she could feel, but hadn't yet picked up. She didn't know him well. Only the outline of him, the gray-bearded man, who ran the smithy at the south end of the village's main road. Who shod horses for half the county, including Vorn's men. Who repaired ironwork for the financial house. Who had been inside Vorn's buildings, with enough regularity, that a piece of Vorn's stationery in his hands would not have raised a question. And who, 3 days ago, when the news of the bridge spread through Veldmoor, had been standing at the far end of the street watching the crowd's reaction rather than reacting with it. The posture of a man who already knew. She set her pen down. Kedren was awake. She had known for about 4 minutes. His breathing had changed, the shift from unconscious rhythm to the controlled stillness of a man waking in an unfamiliar place, and choosing not to announce it yet. She had the same habit. She recognized it in other people. "The village will be awake soon," she said without turning from the table. "They'll send someone today." A pause. Then, Colm. Or someone Colm supervises. Vorn won't want noise. He'll send someone official enough to have standing at my door. Not so many, that it looks like what it is. She heard him shift. Sit up. The small sounds of a man negotiating, with a body that was not yet fully cooperating. You've already worked through the sequence. I had the night. Another pause. Longer. So did I, he said. For what it's worth, the calculation you're running is right. Vorn will move official. Because official gives him protection, when someone asks questions later about what happened here. So when they come, they'll want to search the cabin. Yes. And you'll be visible the moment they walk through the door. He said it, with the straightforward quality of a man who had accepted an uncomfortable fact, and was not going to spend energy pretending otherwise. She appreciated that. She had no patience this morning for people who required their difficult truths cushioned. She stood. Looked at the cabin. 1 room. The bed. The curtained corner where Kit slept. The stove and the table, and the single south-facing window. No second exit except the door, and the window, too small for a grown man. Except. She looked at the gap between the stove and the north wall. Narrow. 12 inches, maybe 14. But it existed. Behind that wall, the exterior north face, she had built a lean to structure herself 2 summers ago. Crude. Open on the north side. For firewood storage. To keep the worst of the winter snow off the stack. The lean-to was not enclosed. It opened to the tree line. 20 yards of open ground. Then forest. When they come, she said, you will not be here. She did not frame it as a suggestion. He followed her gaze to the north wall. Understood. The gap behind the stove. There's a firewood shelter on the other side. Open to the north. The tree line is 20 yards. She looked at him directly. Can you move that far? He tested the knee. Extended his leg. Something moved through his expression, brief, contained. The reflex of a man who had long practiced deciding what his face was allowed to say about pain. Yes. You'll need to be through the gap before they reach the step. The gap is narrow. I've been through narrower. She believed him. A man who had spent years moving through the gray spine passes had certainly navigated tighter spaces than the gap between her stove and her wall. Once you're out, keep going. Don't stop at the tree line. She picked up the almanac. Found a margin with enough space. Drew the tree line, the property boundary of the abandoned Margrave claim, the shed itself. Put a mark where the shed stood. Tore the page out, and handed it to him. He looked at the map. She watched him memorize it, the systematic scan of someone who had spent years converting drawn terrain into navigable reality. When he folded it and put it inside his shirt, she knew he no longer needed the paper. He had kept it because she had made it. She noticed that. Filed it in the place where she kept things she wasn't ready to name yet. Kit appeared from behind his curtain. Sleep rumpled. A new drawing in his hand, a horse this time, with a rider, both rendered with the serious interpretive conviction of an artist working from imagination and strong feelings about what horses and their riders should fundamentally look like. He put the drawing on the table. Looked at Kedron. Looked at his sister. Conducted whatever internal accounting he was conducting. Then he looked at the stove. Is there coffee? No. There should be coffee. There is oatmeal. Kit considered this information, with the expression of someone who had received a lesser outcome than hoped for, but was prepared to accept reality. Kedron looked at the drawing. After a moment he said quietly, "That's a good horse." Kit looked up. Assessed whether this was genuine or polite. Concluded it was genuine. His expression shifted, just slightly. The particular shift of a child who has received accurate recognition rather than adult performance. His name is River, Kit said. I just decided. Neither Soren nor Kedron said anything to that. But something passed between them in the air of the cabin. Small. Unannounced. The kind of thing that didn't require language, because language would have reduced it. Outside, the morning light hardened toward the flat clarity that came before the coldest part of an October day. Somewhere on the North Road, a rider was already moving, with information that would set other things in motion. They had until mid-morning. Soren put the oatmeal on. They ate at the table, the three of them, in the particular silence of people who have something large and unspoken between them, and have reached a mutual agreement not to spend words on what everyone already understands. Kit ate with the methodical seriousness of a child who had learned that food was function. Kedron ate slowly. His hands steadier than yesterday. His color better. When Kit finished, he took his bowl to the basin, picked up his charcoal, and went back to drawing horses. Because that was what he did. That was what he had always done. And some continuities were worth protecting even when everything around them was in motion. Kedron looked at Soren across the table. If this goes wrong today, he said. If Vorn. It won't go wrong today, she said. Today is only the first move. And the first move is simple. You are not here when they arrive. That's all today needs to accomplish. A beat. You've done this before, he said. Not a question. I've managed problems before. They're the only kind I've ever had. Something in his face, not quite a smile, but the space where one could live, if given enough time. He stood. Carefully. The knee taking his weight with reluctant cooperation. She handed him the coat. And then she watched him go, through the narrow gap behind the stove, sideways, ducking his head at the last moment. Into the lean-to. And then, through the small north-facing window, she watched his shape cross the 20 yards of frozen ground to the tree line. He didn't look back. She had not expected him to. She turned from the window. Straightened the blanket on the bed. Squared the corners. Removed every physical evidence of a second occupant, the second cup, the second cloth, the slight depression in the pillow. She was thorough. She was fast. By the time the sound of horses reached her, multiple hooves on frozen ground, arriving from the direction of the North Road, she was sitting at the table, with her hands around a cup of tea that had gone cold an hour ago. Kit was drawing. The fire was going. Everything in the cabin said, nothing unusual here. She did not move when the footsteps reached the step. She opened the door before they knocked. Colm was on the lead horse. She had expected this. The shape of it had been clear enough, from the beginning. Vorn would send someone with direct knowledge. Someone whose investment in the outcome went past the professional. Colm was broad. He sat his horse, with the particular ease of a man who spent more time mounted than on foot. His face was the face of someone who had decided, somewhere on the ride over, to find this morning's work uncomplicated. Behind him, two men she didn't know. The category of hired function. Present for numbers rather than names. And at the back, half a length behind the others, a younger man, with a leather satchel across his chest. The kind of satchel record keepers carried. Vorn was being careful. A witness. Someone sent to document. Which meant whatever happened this morning would exist in written form, that could be examined later. That was useful information. She filed it immediately. Mr. Soren. Colm's voice was the voice of courtesy performed as paperwork. We have information suggesting you've provided shelter to a fugitive, from a county investigation. What investigation? Colm's expression shifted. Minimally. The collapse of the Ashran crossing. Lord Kedron Ashvale is a person of interest. A person of interest. She said it without inflection. Let it sit in the cold morning air, and mean what it meant. In the collapse of a bridge. There are questions about the circumstances of his crossing. She looked at him steadily. Do you have a writ from Magistrate Osric? The pause that followed was the pause of a man who had prepared for several things. He had prepared for fear. He had prepared for tears. He had prepared for the door being slammed. He had not prepared for procedural fluency, from a woman who ran fish traps before sunrise. This is a regional matter, Colm said. Lord Vorn's authority. Lord Vorn's authority extends to actions sanctioned by the magistrate's court. She looked at him directly. Does it not? Colm met her eyes. His face gave nothing. The record-keeper's pencil moved at the back of the group. Magistrate Osric's office opens at 8, Colm said finally. A writ could be obtained. Then obtain one, Soren said. I'll be here. Colm looked at her for a long moment. Then he looked at the two men behind him, running the calculation of what he could compel versus what he could justify. With a witness writing everything down. Mr. Soren. He moved his horse 2 steps forward, separating himself from the group. The deliberate shift of a man moving from official to personal. As if the distance changed the nature of the conversation. Lord Vorn is a man who values cooperation. He has considerable resources. A woman in your position, with outstanding obligations of the kind you carry, there are things that could be addressed by a man with Lord Vorn's reach. In exchange for telling you where to find a man who may or may not be on my property, she said. Clearly. At a volume the record-keeper's pencil could follow. Colm's expression tightened at the edges. I'm describing a practical arrangement. I heard what you described. She stepped off the doorstep and moved to one side. Search the cabin. You've come this far. I won't stop you. This was not what any of them had prepared for. Permission given freely in front of a witness had a different legal texture than a door forced open. Every man on horseback understood that, even if understanding it produced frustration rather than satisfaction. Colm got down from his horse. The 2 unnamed men followed. The record-keeper stayed mounted. His pencil kept moving. They were inside for 7 minutes. Soren stood in the doorway and listened to their boots on the floorboards. Heard where they went. How long they stopped. What they opened and closed. The trunk. The curtain to Kit's corner, pulled aside, released. The root cellar trap door lifted, dropped. The gap behind the stove, which one of them examined, and apparently found uninteresting, because nobody stayed near it. Kit sat at his table and drew horses. with the focused serenity of a child who had decided that whatever was happening on the other side of the room was simply not as important as getting the angle of the front left leg correct. When Colm came back out, his face had the expression of a man who had been certain of something and was now required to revise. The certainty was still there, but the evidence had left without a forwarding address. "He was here," Colm said. Not to her. To the space between her and himself. "A man came out of the river and needed a night indoors," Soren said. "He left the following morning. A beat. That's what I told you now." It was true then, too. Colm looked at her, with the look of a man who knew he was correct and could not prove it, and found both conditions simultaneously intolerable. "You're protecting him. I pulled a man from the river because he would have drowned. I gave him a night's shelter, because that is what a person does." She held his gaze. "If that's protection, then I'm guilty of it. But I'm not aware it's a crime." The record keeper's pencil moved. Colm got back on his horse. Spoke to the two men in a voice too low to carry. Then he looked at Soren, the look she had been expecting since the moment she saw him on the East Bank 3 days ago. The look that said this conversation had been logged, and would continue in a different form at a time of his choosing. "Good morning, Mistress Soren," he said, and rode north. She waited until the sound of the horses was entirely gone, before she moved. Kit appeared at her elbow. They didn't find anything. No. He looked at the direction they had gone. His expression was the expression of a 9-year-old, who understood more than he was supposed to, and had the good sense not to say most of it. "They'll come back." "Yes," Soren said. "Which is why what happens today matters more than what just happened." She went inside. Got her coat from the hook. Checked that the pocket held the letter, waxed paper, dry, folded twice. "Get your coat on properly," she told Kit. "You're going to Margaret Hartwell's." Kit looked at the incorrectly buttoned coat he was already wearing. Looked at her. Made the specific calculation of a child determining whether this was a moment to negotiate. It was not. He buttoned the coat correctly, without being asked twice. She walked him to Margaret Hartwell's herself, 3/4 of a mile south, along the river path. Margaret was 60 years old, ran a vegetable garden she dramatically overproduced, and had a documented tendency to feed any child who came within range of her kitchen. She opened the door before they knocked. Asked no questions. Looked at Soren once, with the eyes of a woman who had spent 6 decades in this kind of country, and had developed a very complete taxonomy of which questions were useful, and which were interference. Kit went in. The door closed. Soren turned north. She kept to the lower ground. The path along the cottonwood line, below the sight line of the main road. Not because she thought she was being followed, she was reasonably certain she wasn't, not yet, not this morning. But because the habit of moving through cover was a good one to reinforce, and a bad one to break. Suttle's wagon was already on the north end of the main road, when she reached the edge of the village. 2 brown mules at the water trough outside the feed merchant. Suttle himself moving sacks from the shop to the wagon bed, with the unhurried efficiency of a man who had done this particular task 1,000 times, and had made his peace with the number. She came up beside the wagon, from the south. Stopped. Her voice at the register of a normal transaction. Because a woman speaking quietly to a supply driver on a public road was nothing worth looking at. "I need you to carry a word to the Ashvale camp." 4 words. A beat. "Kedron is alive. South." Suttle put down the sack in his hands. Did not look at her. Looked at the mules. At the sacks in the wagon. At the middle distance of a man running a private calculation. "All this has been covering considerable ground looking for news," he said. "Asked me Monday whether I'd seen anything unusual on the North Road over the weekend." "What did you tell him?" "That I hadn't been on the North Road over the weekend." He picked the sack back up. Set it in the wagon. Which was true. I go the south road. Past the Ashvale camp. On my regular run. Another sack. Don't see any reason to change my route today. Thank you, Soren said. Don't. He didn't look at her. I'm just running my regular route. She left him to it. Walked back south toward the smithy at the far end of the main road. And here was where it got complicated. Here was where the list in the almanac margin met the part of the problem that could not be solved by sequence alone. Because what she needed, from Fennec, the thief rested at the center of everything, was not information. She already had the shape of it. What she needed was testimony. Which was a different thing entirely. Which required a different approach. Because you did not walk up to a man who had been carrying something heavy for 5 years and ask him to set it down, as if setting it down were simple. The smithy was closed. Doors latched from the outside. She walked around to the back. He was there. Sitting on an upturned bucket behind the building. Eating his midday meal from a cloth. In the cold. Which was the behavior of a man who had long ago decided that he preferred the cold to the proximity of people, or the cold to the weight of being watched, while he ate, or simply the cold. Which said something about what he was used to bearing. He looked up when he heard her footsteps. Did not appear surprised. Did not stand. She sat on the low stone wall that formed the back boundary of the property. Took a moment. Because she was going to say something she could not unsay. And she wanted to be certain of the words first. You wrote the letter, she said. Not a question. He looked at her for a long time. The look of a man who had been carrying something for a long time, and had just had someone describe its shape accurately. From the outside, she continued. Steady. Even. The voice she used, when she wanted to be heard, without being interrupted. The one sent to Kedron Ash Vale. Before he left for the crossing. On stationery from Vorn's financial house. The letter warning him the road was dangerous. He said nothing. But he didn't deny it either. In her experience, the silence that followed a true accusation was distinct from the silence that followed a false one. The former was a man deciding how to respond. The latter was a man deciding how to object. Fennec was deciding how to respond. He survived, she said. He's alive. And what is going to happen in the next few days will require someone to stand in front of people who can record what is said and act on it. She watched his hands, very still on the cloth in his lap. I think you know more than you've said. I think you've known it for a long time. And I think you wrote that letter because some part of you was trying to put something right, without having to say it out loud. He looked at his hands. At the wall. At the narrow strip of cold sky above the mountains to the west. And then he talked. His voice was the voice of a man speaking, from the bottom of something. 5 years ago. September. He had been hired through a man he knew only by a description that resolved, with hindsight, to one of Vorn's intermediaries, to go to the eastern storage yard of the Ashvale Lordship at night, and take down the fire bell, from its mounting. That was the entire job. No explanation given. Coin paid in advance. He knew the yard. He knew people worked there at night during the harvest storage season. He told himself he didn't know what the money was for. That particular pause lasted several seconds. There had been a fire before, he said. At a competitor's property. Years back. When Vorn wanted a man to sell, and the man wouldn't sell. The words were coming out now in the flat cadence of a record being read aloud. Something that had been written long ago, and stored. I let myself not put those two things together. A long silence. A woman died in that fire, Soren said. Iora Ashvale. Yes. He looked at her. You know him. I pulled him from the river. Something moved through Fennec's face that was beyond the ordinary register of expression. The particular movement of guilt that has been kept still for a very long time, and is finally being allowed to be visible. I tried to stop the bridge thing, he said. I heard them talking. I used what I had. It was all I had, that wouldn't get me killed immediately. I know, Soren said. That's why I came to you instead of going around you. He looked at her directly for the first time, since she had sat down. What do you need? I need you to say, in front of Magistrate Osric, and a record keeper, and eventually in front of whatever authority the Liege Council send, what you just said to me. All of it. The bell. The fire. Who hired you? Who gave the order? She held his gaze. Did not look away. I know what that costs. I'm not pretending I don't. But Vorn will keep doing this, until someone makes it impossible for him to continue. And the only thing that makes it impossible is the truth said out loud in a place where it can't be buried. He looked at his hands. At the wall. At that same strip of sky. Soren waited. She had learned to wait. It was one of the skills that a life, without resources developed by necessity, and that people, with resources never built, because they could always buy movement, when stillness became uncomfortable. When he nodded, once, the nod of a man who had made a decision, and was not going to revisit it, she believed it. Because the revisiting was what had kept him quiet for 5 years. And he was finished with it. She could see that plainly. Don't tell anyone I came to you, she said, standing. Not yet. He picked the cloth back up. Looked at the food in it, as though he had forgotten what eating was for. I've had practice, he said. Not telling people things. That part one can manage. She left him there. Behind the smithy. In the cold. She was halfway back to the Hartwell place, when she saw Hesta Vorn. Hesta was coming out of the county land office, the building Soren had been studiously avoiding since October. She had a folder of papers under her arm. The expression of a woman who had just concluded a transaction that satisfied her. Approximately. She looked up. Saw Soren. Either of them changed direction. Because changing direction would have meant something neither was prepared to concede. They stopped 3 feet apart on the wooden walkway. Hesta looked at Soren. The assessment. The accounting. The rapid inventory of what had changed since the last time she had looked. Something had changed. Hesta was good enough at what she did to know it, even if she couldn't yet say what it was. I've been thinking about your situation, Hesta said. I expect you have, Soren said. Lord Vorn has made a formal offer on the river frontage. If your land note goes unpaid, the property would transfer through my hands to his. Hesta shifted the folder under her arm. But I want you to understand that's not the only sequence available. What's the other one? A restructuring of your note. Longer repayment. Reduced interest. Said with the flat practicality of someone presenting an alternative route on a map. No particular investment in which one was chosen. In exchange for which I would want your honest account of what you found at the Ashern crossing. Soren took a moment with this. Hesta was not offering generosity. Hesta did not deal in generosity. She was offering a trade. Which meant she wanted information, and had calculated that this was the best way to obtain it. Which meant something had happened to make the information more valuable to her than the land. Or something had happened to make the land less reliably valuable than it had appeared. What happened to the Vorn arrangement? Soren said. Hesta's expression did not change. But something behind it did. A small adjustment. Nothing has happened to anything. If nothing had happened, you'd be on the direct road to holding my note, until it voided, and selling the frontage to Vorn. That's the more profitable sequence, and you know it. Soren looked at her steadily. Something changed. Either Vorn's position changed. Or yours did. Or you received information that made you less certain of what the next month looks like. Hesta was quiet for several seconds. The quality of the quiet was the quality of a woman recalibrating. I'll send you a revised note by end of the week, Hesta said finally. The terms will be better than the current ones. You have my word. Your written word, Soren said. By Friday. Hesta looked at her. The look lasted a beat longer than such looks usually lasted. That was the beat of recognition. The moment when a person understood they were dealing with something different from what they had assumed they were dealing with. Then she walked away. Squared shoulders. Iron gray hair. The unhurried pace of a woman who knew how to perform certainty even when she was feeling something else entirely. Soren watched her go, and thought about what had made Hesta move toward negotiation today, after 3 weeks of moving toward foreclosure. Someone had said something. Or Hesta had seen something. Or Hesta had looked at the situation this morning, Colm arriving with men, and a record keeper at Soren's cabin, and done the arithmetic that a sufficiently intelligent person did, when they saw power moving in an uncomfortable direction. Whose side did she want to be on, when the questions were asked later? Soren filed that. Walked on. She reached the Hartwell place before dark. Kit was at the kitchen table, eating cornbread, discussing the structural properties of bridges, with Margaret Hartwell, who was listening, with the attentiveness of a woman who had discovered that an interested 9-year-old asking questions about bridges was considerably more entertaining than her usual Thursday afternoon. Soren stood in the doorway for a moment. Just a moment. Kit was fine. More than fine. His color was better than this morning. The thin winter light that came through Margaret's south-facing window caught the side of his face, and he looked, briefly, just briefly, like a child, who did not have anything serious wrong with him. She did not let herself stay in that thought too long. It was the kind of thought that cost something, if you were not careful. She collected him. Walked him home along the river path in the gathering dark. He talked about bridges the whole way. How the Romans had built theirs differently than people built them here. How the key was in the arch. How an arch distributed weight sideways, as well as down. She listened. Answered when he asked a direct question. Let the rest of it wash over her the way you let a sound you love wash over you when you are too tired to actively receive it. Back at the cabin, she got the fire going again. Put water on. Sat at the table, with the almanac and the margins, where she had been working through the sequence. Tomorrow was the Subtle run. Subtle would reach the Ashvale camp by midday. Aldous would receive 4 words and understand them. What he did with them in the next 12 hours would determine the shape of the day after that. She had to trust that. She had no other mechanism for reaching Kedron's people. So she trusted the gray-bearded man, with his 2 mules, who corrected people's arithmetic to their faces. She was wagering on that kind of integrity. It was, in her experience, the most reliable kind. Because it was not about context. A man who corrected Hesta Vorn's arithmetic in public had decided his own accounting mattered more than the social consequences of accuracy. That decision did not toggle based on the situation. It was structural. Around the time the last window light gave out, she heard a sound from the direction of the lean-to. The knock at the door came 2 hours after full dark. 2 beats. Even spaced. Exactly as arranged through Subtle's 4 words, which had apparently been interpreted with the efficiency she had expected. She opened the door. Aldous was lean, weathered, with the eyes of a man who had been awake for an extended period, and was running on the kind of focus that replaced sleep when sleep wasn't available. He had a horse behind him, dark against the darker dark. He had his hat in his hand, and the expression of a man who had ridden hard, and was willing to ride harder, if given a direction. She knew him. Not personally. But she recognized what he was. The kind of loyal that was not about contract or coin. The kind that came from having chosen a person and remaining chosen. Dale had it. Toward her. Toward the few other things he had committed himself to before he died. It was rarer than it appeared, and easier to recognize than to describe. Mistress Soren. He knew her name. Which meant Subtle had offered more than 4 words, or Kedron had told him something, before the crossing. Subtle said. I know what Subtle said. She opened the door wider. Come in. Quietly. My brother is asleep. He came in. Looked around the cabin in the rapid inventory way of someone assessing an environment. Looked at the empty bed. Looked at her. He's not here, she said. He's been in an abandoned shed on the old Margrave claim, since the night before Colm came to search this place. She found the second copy of the map she had drawn, and handed it to him. He looked at it. His hands were very steady. The steadiness of a man managing urgency by concentrating it rather than suppressing it. How is he? The knee is the primary injury. He could manage short distances by the third day. Whether he can ride hard is a different question. She watched his face. He needs another day. Possibly two. But that window may not be available. Colm came this morning. 5 men. A record keeper. I know. Word travels. A beat. There are 3 men, from the camp in the village since Monday. I sent them, when I couldn't find him on the North Road. She absorbed this. I also sent a message to the Liege Council's office in the east. Aldous said. Tuesday morning. Requesting their representative be sent on grounds of deliberate sabotage, and compromised local authority. And? The response came this afternoon. He met her eyes. A representative will be in Veldmore by end of day Friday. 2 days. She had 2 days to build what needed to be built, before a formal authority arrived, and the shape of things became permanent. There's something else, she said. There's a man in the village. Fenwick. The blacksmith at the south end of the main road. She held Aldous' gaze. He has direct knowledge of Vorn's connection to the fire that killed Iora Ashvale 5 years ago. Something moved across Aldous' face. Not surprise. The movement of a man who had known the shape of a thing for a long time, and had never had evidence for it. He'll testify? He said he would. He's been carrying this for 5 years. He's ready to put it down. She paused. But Kedron needs to be present. Not because the law requires it. Because Fenwick is going to say something that Kedron has been trying to understand for 5 years. And Kedron deserves to hear it in person. From the man saying it. Aldous looked at her. The particular way he looked at her in that moment, assessing, updating, arriving at a conclusion, was something she had seen before in a different face under different circumstances. I need to get to him tonight, Aldous said. Yes. And tomorrow we need a plan for Friday. She was already reaching for the almanac. I have one. Most of one. The part I'm still working through is how to get Vorn into the open street rather than barricaded in his hall when the council's representative arrives. Because if he stays behind his own walls, with his own men, it becomes something that can go wrong in a lot of directions. Aldous thought for a moment. Kedron can draw him out. By being visible. Vorn spent 20 years being the largest presence in every room in this county. Being seen to hide from the man he tried to kill is worse for him than confronting it. He'll tell himself he's coming out, because hiding is beneath him. Aldous' expression shifted. Something almost like the space before a smile. What it actually is that he can't stop himself. Which is how you end up standing in an open street, with Vorn's men around you. Yes, Aldous said simply. That's the risk. Soren looked at the door. At the almanac margins. At the map in Aldous' hands. One more thing, she said. Before Friday. Before the representative arrives. He waited. Kedron needs to know about Iora. About what Fenwick is going to say. She found the right words carefully. He's been carrying that as an accident for 5 years. Learning it wasn't an accident is not a small thing. He shouldn't learn it in an open street, under Vorn's eyes for the first time. Aldous was quiet for a long moment. The kind of quiet that meant he was looking at something he had not looked at directly before. You've been thinking about him, he said. I've been thinking about what the situation requires, Soren said. Which includes thinking about him. Aldous nodded. Put his hat back on. I'll tell him tonight. Before anything else. He paused at the door. Turned back. Mr. Soren. My lord has resources. Considerable ones. If there is anything that can be done about your circumstances, the land note, the debt, he will want to address it. I know, Soren said. I'll take that up with him directly. Aldous looked at her for a moment. The look of a man revising an estimate upward. Yes, he said. I imagine you will. He went out into the night. She heard his horse move south along the river path, away from the road, exactly as she would have directed him, if he had asked. She stood at the window, until the darkness was just darkness again. Then she sat at the table. Picked up the almanac. Looked at the margins. At the sequence she had written. At the names with lines between them, and the questions that still needed answering, and the 2 days that stood between now and Friday. 2 days. Kit breathed in his corner. That familiar rhythm. The slight catch. The almost whistle. Not worse than yesterday. She listened to it the way she always listened. First thing and last thing. Then she made a fresh cup of tea. The real kind. Not reheated. And she sat with it in the chair, and worked through the parts of the plan that weren't written down yet. The parts that depended on knowing how people behaved when they were afraid. When they were cornered. When the thing they had built over years began to come apart faster than they could manage it. She knew how Hesta behaved. She was beginning to understand how Vorn behaved. She knew how Fennec behaved now. And she was starting to know, in the way that two people came to know each other, when extraordinary circumstances removed all the ordinary scaffolding between them, how Kedron Ashvale behaved. He would stand in that street on Friday. Not because it was brave. Because it was the only thing consistent with who he was. She would stand there too. She had known that since the morning on the bank. Since the moment she looked at a man going under, and understood that the question wasn't whether to go in after him. The question had never been whether. Some decisions were made, before you knew you were making them. The actual choice was just the moment the world caught up. The Widow and the River King Part 3, in the street, in the light of day. She did not sleep Thursday night either. That was 3 nights now. 3 nights of sitting at the table, with the almanac, and the margins, and the fire doing its slow work, while Kit breathed in his corner, and the Ashran moved outside like something that had never heard of any of this. She had stopped counting the hours she was losing. What was the point? The hours were gone. What remained was what she had done with them. And what she had done with them was build something. Not with timber or stone. With sequence. With names. With the careful mapping of who could be trusted to do what, and in what order, and what happened if any single piece failed to hold. 5 pieces. That was what the plan had come down to. 5 pieces, each one depending on the piece before it, none of them fully within her control. All this getting Kedron mobile and into Veldmore before dawn Friday. Without being seen on any road, Colm's men were watching. Fennec. At the south end of the main road. 8 o'clock. Good coat. Ready to say out loud the thing he had been carrying for 5 years. Magistrate Osric. Present. Visible. Not acting, just there, in his capacity, which was itself a statement that what happened this morning had the weight of legitimate authority behind it. The council representative from the east. Arriving by end of day. Which was the piece she controlled least. Which meant trusting that Aldous' message had been received accurately, and that the man who received it understood urgency. And the 5th piece. Herself. Which was the simplest piece on paper, and the one most dependent on all the others holding. She worked through it, until the window went from black to gray blue. Then she built up the fire. Made oatmeal. Sat and ate alone in the quiet, before Kit woke. Outside the Ashran moved. Patient. Indifferent. Carrying everything downstream whether it wanted to go or not. She thought about the morning she had gone into it. 8 days ago now. The cold that wasn't a temperature. The man going under. The choice that wasn't really a choice by the time she was making it. Some things you decided before you knew you were deciding. The actual moment was just the world catching up to you. Kit woke at 6. Emerged from behind his curtain, with the drawing he had been working on last night, a bridge this time. Rendered with architectural precision she had not taught him, and could not quite account for. The arch is correct. The way the weight distributed through the supports somehow right. She put the oatmeal in front of him. He looked at it. Looked at her. "Today is the day," he said. Not a question. "Yes." "Will it work?" She looked at her brother. 8 days ago he had asked her if the man on her bed was going to die. She had told him the truth then. She would tell him the truth now. "Yes." "You're sure?" "I'm sure enough to act on it." "Which is the only kind of sure that matters." He thought about this. Nodded once. Ate his oatmeal, with the focused efficiency of a child, who had decided this was not a morning to be slow about things. She walked him to Margaret Hartwell's herself. The river path in the early dark. Frost on every surface. The cottonwood branches against the sky looking like cracks in something. Margaret opened the door before they knocked. Because of course she did. Margaret had been watching for them. Soren did not stay. She turned back toward the village and walked. 3 miles. Alone. In the particular clarity of a person who has finished making all the preparatory decisions, and now simply has to execute them. No more calculation. No more variables. Just the frozen ground under her boots, and the gray sky overhead, and the things she was walking toward. The village came into view around the long bend south of the main road. Wood smoke from morning fires. A horse at the livery expressing an opinion about the cold. The feed merchant unlocking his door, with the methodical purposefulness of a man who had done the same thing at the same time for 15 years, and expected to continue. She looked north along the main road. And there he was. Kedron was standing in front of the Greycliff Inn. Aldous at his left shoulder. 2 men from the Ashvale camp slightly behind them. And the morning light was doing what morning light did to a man standing still in it, making him visible, from a distance. Making his presence a fact rather than a possibility. He looked, from where she stood at 50 yards, like what he was. A man who had chosen his ground. And was not planning to leave it. His knee was bothering him. She could see it in the distribution of his weight even at this distance. The slight favor to the left. The almost imperceptible stiffness in the right side of his stance. Not visible to someone who wasn't looking for it. Visible to her, because she had watched him negotiate that knee for 8 days, and she knew its particular grammar. He was managing it. He would manage it all morning, if that was what the morning required. She walked north toward him. He saw her, when she was 30 yards out. His face changed. Not the recalibration she had catalogued earlier in the week. Not the measuring look. Something settled. Something past both of those. The expression of a man who has been running a long internal argument, and has arrived at his conclusion, and is at peace with the place it brought him. "You walked," he said when she reached him. 3 miles. "I've done it before." Aldous looked at her, with the updated assessment she had seen in his face Wednesday night. Said nothing. Which was the right thing. "How is the knee?" she said to Kedron. "Present. Uncooperative. Magistrate Osric at 8. Fenwick at 8 from the south end of the road." She kept her voice low. Not secretive, there was nothing left to be secretive about, that time had passed, but precise. Information for the context where it mattered. "The council representative by end of day. Which means we are working, with county authority this morning, and formal authority before dark. And Vorn. He'll come out." Kedron looked north along the main road toward the Vorn Hall. Still shuttered at this hour. The dark windows. The heavy gate. He spent 20 years being the largest presence in every room in this county. He won't receive the news that I'm standing in his street by staying inside his hall. A pause. He'll tell himself it's because hiding is beneath him. And what it actually is, Soren said, is that he can't stop himself. His jaw moved once. Some men are made that way. Power long enough held becomes the thing that holds them. She looked at the hall. Thought about Breck Vorn behind those shuttered windows. Running his calculations. The same kind of calculations she had been running all week. But from the opposite side of the ledger. And with the disadvantage of not knowing, yet, exactly what had assembled against him. He was going to find out. Then we wait, she said. Yes. He looked at her. Something in the look that was different from everything that had come before it. Not measuring. Not recalibrating. Something that had reached its destination and was standing there. Together, I think. She looked back at him. Did not say anything. But she did not look away either. The street filled slowly. The way small streets filled, when something was known to be coming, without the exact form being announced. People appeared in doorways. The barber's pole began its turn. 3 women stopped on the walkway in front of the dry goods store, and stayed stopped, the particular stillness of people, who had decided that wherever they were was exactly where they needed to be. Children who had been heading toward their lessons were redirected by some collective parental understanding that moved faster than words. Fenwick arrived at 10 minutes to 8. From the south end of the road. His good coat. Moving with the deliberate pace of a man who had made a decision in the dark and was delivering himself to its consequences in the light. He came to where Soren and Kedren stood and stopped. He looked at Kedren. Kedren looked at him. Aldous stepped slightly to one side, making space, which was the right instinct. Because what was about to happen in the 3 feet between these 2 men did not need anyone crowding it. My Lord Ashvale, Fenwick said. His voice was low, but the street was quiet enough that it carried. Fenwick, Kedren said. Even. A silence. The particular silence of 2 people, who had a great deal of relevant history between them, and were standing at the edge of the part, where it would finally be spoken rather than carried. I have things to tell you, Fenwick said. Some of them are going to be hard to hear. Tell me. Not a command. Permission. Which was different. Which meant he was already bracing for something he had suspected for longer than he had allowed himself to know. Fenwick looked at the ground for a moment. Then at Kedren's face directly. The manner of a man who had decided the minimum he owed was to say it, while looking at the person he was saying it to. The fire at the eastern yard. The night Iora Ashvale died. I was hired to disconnect the fire bell from its mounting at the north gate. He stopped. Let that land. I knew the yard. I knew people worked there at night. I told myself I didn't know what the job was for. Another stop. I did know. I just chose not to follow the knowing all the way to the end. The street was entirely still. Not because people had stopped moving. Because everything had stopped. The way everything stops, when something true is being said in a public place, and everyone present understands, without being told, that they are witnessing something that cannot be taken back. Kedren was entirely still. Not the composed stillness she had learned to read as management. Something under the management. Something that had been held in suspension for 5 years, and was now being asked to move. Vorn, Kedren said. A man acting for him. I never spoke with Vorn directly. But I knew whose money it was. Fenwick's voice was the voice of someone reading from a document they had been carrying a long time. Every word already written. Finally being said. She died because I did the job and didn't ask why. I cannot give that back. But I can say the truth about it. The silence that followed had weight. Real weight. The kind you could feel in your chest. The kind that came when something had been false for a long time and had just been made true, and the air itself needed a moment to adjust. Nobody filled it. Because it was Kedron's silence. And everyone present understood that. Even the people who didn't know him. Even the 60-odd people in doorways, and on walkways, who had never seen him before this morning. Something in the quality of the moment made it legible to everyone watching. Kedron looked at the street. At the mountains beyond the village's north edge, visible in the gap between the inn and the assay office. The gray spine range sitting in its permanent remove from everything that happened below it. Those peaks had been there before Vorn. They would be there after. His jaw moved. His left hand, the hand nearest Soren, closed once. Then opened. "Thank you," he said finally. 2 words. The specific 2 words of a man who had received something he had been owed for years, and was not going to spend this moment performing the size of what it cost him. He would spend that privately. Later. In whatever time and space that grief required. For now those 2 words were exact. Fennec nodded. Once. Enough. Magistrate Osric came around the corner, from his office at 2 minutes to 8. Which was close enough to on time, that it didn't matter. He walked to where they stood, and positioned himself, with the practiced naturalness of a man who had spent decades understanding that where a magistrate placed himself in a public space was itself a statement. He looked at Kedron. "My Lord Ashvale. I am glad you are alive." "So am I," Kedron said. And then Breck Vorn came out of the hall. He came alone first. Just himself. Through the main gate of the Vorn Hall. Stepping onto the road in his dark coat, and his precisely placed hat, and the particular carriage of a man who had long ago made his physical presence part of his professional instrument. He stood on the road and looked south. Took inventory. Counted. His face during this was the face he kept, smooth, measured, the surface of a man accustomed to receiving information, and processing it, without letting the processing show. Kedron. Aldous. 2 Ashvale men. Fennec. Osric. The record keeper at the edge of the crowd, with his satchel open, and his book out. 60 people in doorways and on walkways. He was counting. And the count was not adding up the way he had expected it to. 2 men came out behind him. Then Colm, on foot today. Which was either strategic, horses at close quarters in a street confrontation were a liability, or was the instinct of a man who understood that this morning was going to be about optics, as much as anything else. Vorn walked south. His men walked behind him at a spacing that reflected some training or long habit. Not quite military, but close enough. He walked with the confidence of a man who had decided that his strongest position was always forward. Who had held that position long enough to believe it was invulnerable. Who had never, in 20 years of running this county, encountered a situation that had not eventually resolved in his favor. He had not yet understood that this morning was different. He stopped 12 feet from Kedron. The road between them was open. Clean. Empty of everything except the cold air, and the weight of what was about to happen. "Kedron," Vorn said. His voice was the voice Soren had heard described, but never heard directly. Smooth. Carrying. The voice of a man who had spent a professional lifetime in rooms where voices had to carry, and had refined the instrument accordingly. "I heard you had some difficulty at the crossing." "I did," Kedron said. "You arranged it." Vorn did not move. His face was doing the thing that very controlled faces did under real pressure, maintaining the surface, while the calculation ran underneath. Faster now. Because the count was still not adding up. "That is a serious thing to say in public." "It is a serious thing to do," Kedron said. "And you did it twice." A beat. Vorn's eyes moved. Briefly. To Aldous. To Soren. To Osric. To Fennec. Taking the inventory of what had assembled against him. Coming to rest back on Kedron. "Whatever grievances exist between us," Vorn said, his voice had shifted, still controlled, but with a new frequency underneath it, something that was working harder than the surface suggested. They can be addressed through appropriate channels. I have no objection to a conversation. Then have it, Soren said. She said it clearly. At the volume the open street required. And she stepped forward one step, as she said it, so that she was no longer slightly behind Kedren's shoulder, but level with him. Not behind. Not in front. Level. 60 people heard it. The record keeper opened his book. Vorn looked at her. The look of a man encountering a variable he had not modeled for. A widow. A fish trapper. A woman with a land debt, and a sick brother, and 11 coins in her pocket 8 days ago. Not someone who appeared in his calculations. Not someone he had thought to account for. That was his second mistake. His first had been the bridge. My name is Soren, she said. You know who I am. You've been trying to acquire my land through Heste Vorn for 3 months. She held his gaze without adjusting it. I pulled Lord Kedren from your river on Monday morning. A beat. And I have this. She reached inside her coat. The letter. Wax paper. Still dry. Still intact. She held it at a height the street could see. A letter sent to Lord Kedren before he left for the south, warning him that the road home was dangerous. Written on stationery from the Vorn financial house. She did not look away from Vorn's face. With your institution's seal. Vorn looked at the letter. Something happened in his face. Small. Contained. But present. The look of a man who has just identified the point of failure he had not seen. The thing he had not accounted for. The piece that had moved when he was not watching it. That proves nothing except that someone used. Fenwick would like to speak. Magistrate Osric said. He said it calmly. The measured authority of a man who understood that his function in this moment was not drama but legitimacy. A magistrate naming a witness in public was different from the same name being said by anyone else. It moved the conversation from confrontation into record. And once something was in the record it could not be taken back. Fenwick stepped forward. Into the open road. Into the space between everything. He stood in his good coat, and looked at Breck Vorn, and he said it. All of it. The bell. The fire. The money. The name of the man who had hired him on Vorn's behalf. He said it in the order it had happened. Clearly enough that the record-keeper's pencil could follow. Loudly enough that the back of the crowd could hear. He said it, without embellishment, and without apology, and without taking his eyes off Vorn's face. When he finished the street was quiet in the way streets were quiet, when something true had been said in them. Something that changed what the space meant. Vorn stood in that quiet for 3 full seconds. Soren counted them. Because she counted things. Because counting was the thing she did, when she needed to hold herself still inside the motion of a moment that was moving fast. 1, 2, 3. In those 3 seconds Vorn looked like what he was. Not the largest thing in the county anymore. Not the man whose approval or disapproval set the temperature of every room in a 100-mile radius. Just a man who had been seen clearly. In public. On a cold October morning. Which was the one thing that all the power and money and careful management in the world could not prevent indefinitely. This is slander, he said. But the timing was wrong. The word came out smaller than it should have. Like something that had been prepared for a different room, and arrived in one, with much better acoustics. It is testimony, Osric said. There is a distinction. One of Vorn's men took a step forward. Aldous' hand moved inside his coat. The record-keeper kept writing. And then Colm stepped sideways. Not forward. Not backward. Sideways. And then back. 2 feet. Small. Geometrically insignificant. Situationally everything. He was removing himself from Vorn's immediate proximity. Separating his physical position from the position his physical presence had represented for the last week. He was not crossing to Kedren's side. He was not making a statement. He was simply declining to remain where he had been standing, which was its own statement. And everyone on the road understood it, without needing it explained. Vorn saw it. And in that moment, the moment Colm moved, whatever last calculation Vorn had been running resolved. Because Colm was not an idealist. Colm was a professional. And a professional stepping away was a professional, who had done his own accounting, and reached his own conclusion about which side of this morning he wanted to be documented on. If Colm had reached that conclusion, the arithmetic was not in Vorn's favor. The arithmetic had not been in his favor for some time. He was simply the last to know. He looked at Kedron. "You think this ends anything?" "I think it ends this," Kedron said. "What comes after is not something either of us controls." A pause. The smallest pause. "It ends what was done to Iora." Vorn said the name back. "Iora," said with the particular precision of a man using a word as a weapon. A last attempt to find a wound and press it. "Nothing said in this street today brings her back." The silence that followed was Kedron's silence. Soren stood beside him in it. And did not speak. Because he did not need her to. Because she had learned in 8 days exactly how to stand beside this man. And what he needed from her right now was exactly what she was doing. Presence. Not intervention. Not rescue. Just the fact of being there. Level. Steady. "No," Kedron said finally. His voice was the same as it had been since the beginning of this morning. Even. Not loud. Carrying the specific weight of a man who had organized himself before he came outside and did not intend to become disorganized now regardless of what was thrown at him. "It doesn't. But it tells the truth about what happened to her. And the truth is what she deserved to have told 5 years ago." He looked at Vorn steadily. "You kept that from her. You can't keep it anymore." From the north end of the road. Hoofbeats. Not one rider. 3. Moving at a pace that was professional rather than urgent. Not hurrying. Not performing. Simply arriving on schedule. The council representative's badge caught the morning light at 40 yards. Polished metal. The crest of the Eastern Liege Authority. The crowd parted, the instinct of people who recognized institutional authority, and understood without being told that this was the moment to make space for it. Vorn looked at the riders. Looked at the road around him. At what was assembled. At what was written. At where Colm was standing versus where Colm had been standing. At Osric in his magistrate's space. At the record keeper and his book. At Soren with the letter still in her hand. He stood still for a moment. The very last moment of a man who had controlled everything in his view for so long that the experience of not controlling it was briefly simply incomprehensible. Like a language he had never needed to learn, because he had never been in a country that spoke it. He was in that country now. He raised his hands. Not dramatically. Not with any particular emotion visible on his face. With the flat, final gesture of a man whose ledger had come due, and who had run out of ways to dispute the accounting. Who understood, at last, that the accounting was going to happen regardless. The representative and his 2 deputies came forward. Osric stepped toward them. Spoke briefly. The representative listened. Nodded. The nod of a man who had received sufficient information and knew the next steps. Colm was taken first. Which was the right order. Because Colm knew things. And the things Colm knew would fill in the parts of Vorn's operation that no outside witness had direct access to. Including the previous incidents that had been recorded as accidents and had not been. Then Vorn. The 2 men who had come out of the hall behind him looked at each other. Did the arithmetic of their personal situation. And placed their weapons on the ground before being asked. Because they were not idealists either. Soren watched Breck Vorn walk north along the main road between 2 council deputies. His hat still precisely placed. His coat still square at the shoulders. The posture of a man performing dignity in the only theater still available to him, the 30 yards between, where he had been standing, and where the deputies' horses were tied. She watched him until he turned the corner. Then she looked at Kedrin. He was looking at the space where Vorn had been. Not at Vorn, the man was gone. At the empty space that remained when Vorn was no longer in it. The expression on his face was not satisfaction. Not relief. Not triumph. Something quieter than all of those. Something that had the texture of a door finally opening. Onto a hallway he now had to walk down, and did not yet know the end of. She understood that. Without needing to ask. Without needing him to explain it. She understood it the way you understood something you had seen demonstrated in your own life in a different form at a different time. The square did not empty quickly. Crowds at events like this one, events that a village would describe, and redescribe for years, in which every person present would, over time, develop a clearer sense of exactly where they had been standing, did not empty quickly. They dispersed gradually. In conversations. In pairs and small groups. Everyone working out their own relationship to what they had witnessed. Hesta Vorn had been in the crowd. Soren had seen her near the front of the dry goods store. 3/4 of the way back. Positioned in the precise place a careful woman positioned herself at a public event. Close enough to see clearly. Far enough back to have options. When the deputies took Vorn north, Hesta looked at Soren across the crowd. A long look. Then she turned and went back into her store. The door closed. The revised note from Hesta arrived 4 days later. The terms were considerably better than what Hesta had described on the street. Better, in fact, than Soren had expected. She read it twice. Signed it. Sent it back by the message boy. Fenwick gave his formal statement to the council representative that afternoon in the county clerk's office. Osric present. The record keeper writing everything down in the official account. It took 2 hours. Fenwick was thorough. He did not revise. He did not omit. When he came out he sat on the step for a while and breathed the cold air, and did not speak to anyone. And nobody required him to. Colm cooperated fully within the first week. He knew a great deal, and was prepared to exchange what he knew for consideration in his sentencing. Which was the calculation a sufficiently practical man made, when the alternative was presented to him clearly. His testimony filled in the parts of Vorn's operation that no outside witness had direct knowledge of, including 2 previous incidents that had been recorded as accidents. Vorn himself said almost nothing. This was not principled silence. This was the silence of a man whose advisers had told him to be silent. Which was the silence of a man who still believed that procedure and resource could manage what Friday morning in the village street had made visible. He was wrong about that. But it would take the better part of a year for the proceedings to demonstrate it conclusively. Soren followed the proceedings in the dispatches, and in the accounts Aldous gave her, when he passed through Veldmur. Which was regularly. She did not attend the formal hearings. She had said what she needed to say in the place where it needed to be said. What happened in the council chambers afterward was in hands more appropriate than hers. She had other things to attend to. The most important of which was Kit. Dr. Aldith Marin had her practice in Greymont, 3 days' ride south. She had come west from her training 10 years ago for reasons she described as her own business. She had built something in Greymont that was less a medical office than a statement about what a medical office could be. She specialized in pulmonary conditions in Omega patients. She had been recommended by Aldous, who had learned of her through a contact in the Eastern Territories. Kedrin drove them to Greymont in the 2nd week of November. One of the Ashvale carriages. Properly sprung. Cushioned seats. A wool blanket folded on the bench. Soren had not been in a carriage like this before. She noticed this. She set the noticing aside. Because noticing the quality of the carriage was the kind of thing that could lead you into a way of thinking about your situation that wasn't useful right now. Kit sat between them on the bench, and looked at everything, with the systematic attention he brought to new environments. Asking questions when he had them. Quiet when he didn't. Which was a ratio she appreciated about him, and always had. Kedron answered the questions he was asked. Did not add to them. Did not perform interest he did not have. Which was another thing she was learning about him. He was the same in every room. The same in a carriage, as he had been in her cabin. The same with Kit, as he had been with Fennec. No register switching. No adjustment for audience. She had known very few people like that. She was not sure she had known any. Aldith Marin was compact. About 45. With the direct physical manner of someone whose professional context required precision over social comfort, and had stopped apologizing for that a long time ago. She examined Kit for 40 minutes, while Soren sat in the waiting room, and Kedron sat beside her. Not talking. Just there. Which was exactly what she needed. She had not known she needed it, until it was provided. Which was the thing about receiving exactly the right thing, you didn't always know it was the right thing, until it arrived, and your body understood it, before your mind did. When Aldith came out she sat down across from Soren. The manner of someone who had done this many times, and had learned which approach was most useful for which kind of news. Chronic bronchial inflammation, she said. Common in Omega children born to parents with certain hereditary tendencies. Exacerbated by cold and poor air quality. The kind of air quality common in structures heated by wood fire, without sufficient ventilation. She paused. Not for effect. To make sure Soren was ready for the next part. It is treatable. It requires consistent medication through the winter months. Better air when possible. And time. Another pause. He will not always be as he is now. But this is not a condition that improves on its own. It improves with care. The last words landed in Soren the way the first clear water, after a long dry period, landed. Care. She could provide care. She had been providing it, with what she had. And what she had not been enough. And now there was the possibility of it being enough. And the feeling of that possibility was something she had not been prepared for. Not relief. Relief was what you felt when something bad stopped. When the threat withdrew. When the crisis passed. This was different. This was what you felt when the door that had been closing slowly for a long time stopped. And then began, in small increments, tentatively, as if testing whether it was allowed to open. She put her hand over her face. Her shoulders moved. Kedron was beside her. He did not speak. He put his hand on her shoulder. Large. Steady. The hand of a man who understood that what was needed right now was not words, and not solutions, and not anything except the fact of someone being present in the moment, with her so that she was not alone in it. He kept it there. She let herself cry for approximately 2 minutes. Then she sat up straight. Because 2 minutes was what she had for it. And she had learned a long time ago to be accurate about what she had, and what she did not have. Even when what she had was time for grief. Aldith, who had seen many parents in many waiting rooms, and had developed a calibrated sense of what they needed in the aftermath of significant news, produced a handkerchief from her desk drawer without comment. Which was exactly right. Kit came out of the examination room, with his coat buttoned incorrectly. All the buttons present and accounted for. Simply in the wrong buttonholes. He had buttoned it himself. With the independent confidence of a child, who considered correct buttoning a secondary concern to the primary task of having the coat on at all. He looked at his sister. The look he produced, when he was assessing how she was. Which he had learned by watching her assess him for the entirety of his life. She says I need medicine, he said. Yes. And better air. We'll work on that. He looked at Kedron. Then back at Soren. Is that part of the plan? It's becoming part of the plan, Soren said. He nodded. accepted this with the equanimity he brought to most factual information. Then he looked at his incorrectly buttoned coat, and apparently decided the buttons were not worth revisiting. "Can we eat before we drive back?" "Yes," Kedron said. "We can eat." They ate at the inn across from Aldous building. A real meal. The kind that came on proper plates, with multiple components. Kit navigated it, with the seriousness of someone who understood this was a different category from his usual meals, and was paying attention to everything. He ate a quantity that would have concerned Soren 2 months ago, and did not concern her now. Because his appetite had been returning, as the first round of medicine took hold. And his returning appetite was one of the small daily measures she had been taking, since the week after the street. After he had finished, and had been redirected to the window, the inn's main window looked out on Greymont's trading road, which had considerable interest for a child. From a river cabin, Soren looked at Kedron. He was already looking at her. "The land note is settled," she said. "Hesta's revised terms are manageable on my current income." Kit's treatment, there is money set aside, from the sale of Dale's tools. Not much. Enough for the first months. Kedron looked at her, with the expression she had catalogued most accurately over the past 3 weeks. Not the measuring look. Not the recalibration. The one that came after both of those. The one that had arrived somewhere, and was standing there, quietly, not needing to announce itself. "I know you've handled it," he said. "I'm telling you I've handled it," she said. "Because I want you to know that whatever I say next is not coming from not having handled it." He waited. He was good at waiting. She had noticed that early, and it had not changed. She looked at her hands on the table. At the tablecloth under them, white, clean, pressed with the care of an establishment that believed in that kind of thing. Then she looked at him. "I don't want you to address my situation," she said. "I want you to be part of it. Those are different things. And I need us to be clear about which one we're talking about." A silence. Real silence. The kind that contained the entirety of the past 3 weeks, everything it had required of both of them, everything it had revealed about both of them. Which was considerable. More, possibly, than a year of ordinary acquaintance would have yielded. "I know the difference," he said. "Do you?" "Yes." Without hesitation. Which was not the same as saying it quickly. It was the pace of a man who had already done the thinking, and was being asked to report the conclusion rather than perform the process of reaching it. "What I want from you is not a debt paid. Not a loss replaced." He stopped. Not because he lacked the words. Because he was choosing which ones were accurate enough to be worth saying. "You are the clearest person I have encountered." Not clear in the sense of simple, clear in the sense that when I am with you I can see exactly what I am looking at. I have not had that before. He looked at her steadily. "That is what I want. If you want it too." Soren looked at him. At the man who had been in her river, and in her bed, and in a shed on the Margrave claim for a week, that had rearranged everything it touched. At the man who had heard Fenwick's words in the village street, and received them, without performing what they cost him. At the man who had sat in this waiting room, and understood that the situation required presence, and had provided it, without being asked. At the man who had said thank you to Fenwick, with the specific 2 words of a person who has received something long owed, and is not going to diminish the receiving by making a production of it. "I want it," she said. It was enough. It was in fact exactly enough. The precise number of words required to mean what it meant, without padding the meaning into something smaller. Kit turned from the window. "There is a dog pulling a cart out there," he announced, with the gravity of someone delivering important intelligence. "A very small dog. Pulling a very large cart. Someone should help that dog." "The dog appears to be managing," Kedron said. Kit turned back to assess the situation. "He's managing," he conceded. "But someone should still help." Soren looked at her brother. At the color in his face, better than it had been in a year. At the small thing on Ketrin's face, that was not quite a smile, but was the real thing, the one that did not need much space to mean a great deal. At the white tablecloth. At the window. At the afternoon outside, that was not the afternoon she had been planning for, when she woke up 8 days ago. Or 8 months ago. Or at any point in the life she had been living, before the bridge came down, and the river made its decision. She thought about the morning on the bank. The wire trap in her hand. The cold air. The sound that had registered in her chest, before her ears caught up. The moment before the bridge broke, when everything was still the shape it had always been. And then the moment after. When it wasn't. And would never be again. She had jumped into a river in October, and pulled a stranger out of it. And the river had pulled her out of something too. Not out of difficulty. Difficulty was still there, and would be for a long time. You did not clear a debt, and cure a child's lungs, and build something new in 3 weeks regardless of what happened in between. But out of a shape. A shape she had been fitting herself into for so long she had forgotten it was a shape. Widow. Debtor. Woman with a sick brother, and no margin, and no room for anything beyond the next problem. She was still all of those things. Mostly. She was also something else now. Something that did not yet have a name she was comfortable using. But which was real. Which was, in fact, the realest thing in the room at this particular moment. She had 11 coins on the Monday this started. She was ending the week, and the month, and some chapter she didn't have a name for yet, with considerably more than that. Not just money. The other things. The things that mattered more. The things she had been right all along not to price, before the end of the accounting. Outside, the Greymont trading road continued its indifferent business. The small dog apparently persisted. Soren had learned, in the past weeks, that persistence was its own form of argument. The most durable kind. The kind that did not require an audience. The kind that worked in the dark, and in the cold, and in the early morning, before anyone was watching. She had always known how to make it. So did Kit. River would too. When the time came. She was already sure of that.